Why does it seem in every edition, GW can't help but goof the floof on the Imperial Fists rules? A chapter of such nobility, the Defenders of Terra always seem to have an underwhelming toolkit.
What kind of god would let that happen?
While reviewing their detachment rules, I felt there was an interesting core to the Anvil Siege detachment, and it occurred to me that a few choice alterations could result in a much more mechanically rich and satisfying rule set. I haven't done one of these vids in quite a while. It'll be part mechanics analysis, part review, and part fix, so buckle up.
This is where the fun begins.
Let's modify the Imperial Fists Anvil Siege Force detachment. We'll begin with evaluating the rules as they are. The Anvil Siege Force's detachment rule is Shield of the Imperium. All your ranged weapons gain the heavy ability, which by default gives +1 to hit if that unit remains stationary this turn. For weapons which were already heavy, they also get +1 to wound as well. +1 to wound is a potent efficiency booster, especially for ranged attacks, and it may seem like this makes for a rather strong detachment rule, until you realize that remaining stationary is a huge tax, in a game where you can only move 5 times. In a game where the win condition is achieved by moving to stand on objectives.
That is a huge problem.
And on top of the remaining stationary tax to key into this perk's offering, Heavy isn't a negative status applied to deadly weapons like it was in 8th and 9th edition. In 10th, now it's a perk which provides a buff for remaining stationary.
Meaning?
It means far fewer weapons are heavy, and it's often lacking on the deadly weapons wielded by tank hunting vehicles. There are some exceptions, like the Gladiator Lancer's Laser Destroyer being heavy, but it's made awkward by units like the Vindicator and Predator Annihilator's main armaments, which are lacking. And then there are even further awkward comparisons, like the Predator tank's Heavy Bolters not having the heavy ability, while the Heavy Intercessor's Heavy Bolter does have it. That said, I think a few changes are in order. I like to design detachments or subfaction rules around themes and motifs, where the toolkit as a whole aims to evoke those themes to create a distinct playstyle for that subfaction. For the Imperial Fists, the themes that come to mind are stubborn defense, siegecraft, and shooting. And the mechanic I want to lean into for this is Overwatch, as it's the only interaction where shooting is mechanically framed as a defensive measure. However, the wording of the published detachment rule prevents its benefit from even coming into effect for Overwatch, as you can't declare to remain stationary on the enemy turn. And with the way it's worded, it wouldn't count even if you remain stationary on your turn. Big F. So we gotta change it. Specifically the second sentence, to: in addition, if a weapon meets any of the criteria below, each time an attack is made with that weapon, if the attacking model's unit did not move this turn, add 1 to the wound roll. And those points of criteria are: if it already has the heavy ability, if it has a strength characteristic greater than 7, and if it is a bolt weapon. This change makes the detachment rule much more functional, and now gives you a choice with more merit. A wider array of Imperial Fist units which choose to stand their ground will be more deadly with ranged weapons, better justifying that cost of movement. Or, you can choose to move to a position at the cost of your detachment's rule efficiency bonus, or hell, advance to a position at the cost of shooting altogether, and benefit from your detachment rule on the enemy turn for a defensive play with Overwatch. Moving on to enhancements. Indomitable Fury is pretty good. Getting back up after being laid low is a massive turning point style exception, and to do so while being restored to full HP is big money value. That is, unless you roll a 1. Boy oh boy, do I despise paying for the chance of value. And there is so much potential value here, that when you make the roll, your enemy's gonna be holding their breath, and if you roll the 1, they're like, ugh, thank corn, and you're just left feeling bad. Like some poor chump who has and pays for unreliable mechanics. Reminds me of that Salamander's Rise from the Ashes stratagem. 2 CP on a 4+, your character gets back up.
Again, it's like poetry, so if they rhyme.
Here's a crazy idea. Abilities which are paid for should just work. Here's the modified fix. Rather than a 2+ once per battle, all or nothing, we can modulate the outcome. Simply get back up with 2d3 wounds remaining. That way you always come back with a minimum of 2 wounds, which ensures a Gravis Captain can leverage his damage reduction ability, and at maximum you can still restore Gravis Captain to his full wounds. Next is Fleet Commander, again a once per battle ability that can still fail to do anything, because it requires 1 conditional test per target looking for a 3+, and then does a variable amount of mortal wounds. Also, because of the time delay of the stratagem, the enemy player has the means to move their units. And sure, most units can't move more than 12 inches, but because the mortal wound bomb is line-based, odds are the opposing player will be able to deny it from affecting too many units. So let's hope you roll that 3+. It's a subpar enhancement, so keep it in mind, because we'll come back to it shortly. Stoic Defender I quite like. It gives the bearer's unit a 6-up feel no pain, adding a layer of damage mitigation, and halves the OC instead of zeroing it when the bearer's unit is battle shocked. It's thematic and functional enough. Nice. Architect of War is unexciting. It gives weapons in the bearer's unit ignores cover. And look, cover is everywhere in 10th edition, especially when playing with those tight, modern terrain layouts. And ignoring cover is a fluffy perk for the Imperial Fists. But I find it fails to spark joy, as various weapons already have this ability, as well as Space Marines having a few units which have the means to provide it. I'll suggest moving this perk into Fleet Commander, as it thematically can be tied into battlefield intel provided by the Orbital Fleet, and it provides a bit of persistent value to a fairly swingy once per battle enhancement. As for Architect of War, I think this enhancement slot is a great spot for another mechanic, called Hand of Dorn, providing a once per turn bonus overwatch for a unit within 6 inches. This enhancement serves as a pillar which supports the intended playstyle of their toolkit. The Imperial Fists will have the means to use overwatch twice in a turn. This unique hook gives them a clearer mechanical identity on the tabletop, which will characterize battles against the Imperial Fists in a more distinct way relative to other chapters. On to stratagems. Armor of Contempt is fine. I'm not fond of how crucial of a strat it is for Marine players, but because all other chapters have access to it, it may be a little distasteful to remove it. Rigid Discipline I quite like. Being able to fall back out of phase is a pretty powerful exception, and it's metered by its condition, requiring you to remain in range of an objective marker or your deployment zone. And because that fallback is out of phase, it ensures on your turn that unit can remain stationary, which is well suited to the detachment's direction. Not one backward step I also like. Being able to double up OC at the cost of remaining stationary is also unique, but its value is more circumstantial. If the enemy is trying to out OC you and deny your scoring, you'll have an ace to play. Battle Drill Recall is 1 CP to boost your shooting efficiency. The firing unit gets sustained hits 1, which sounds a bit bad as you're paying a command point and hoping to roll 6s. But if you remain stationary, it also scores crit hits on 5s. And at that point you'll be hitting and maybe wounding with +1, which on a high volume shooting unit is pretty spicy. The only alteration I would make is a slight one. A small addendum which states, any weapon which already has the sustained hits ability should increase it by 1. This way, the Imperial Fists, flexing what everyone knows is Bolter Drill, will still have a tangible effect on heavy bolters. Now on to the strats which are more clunky in function. No Threat Too Great is an expensive efficiency booster. Sure, rerolling wounds is strong, but generally 2 CP stratagems are priced for their out-of-phase momentum swinging capabilities, like with counter-offensive. And when they're not, I don't find them to be worth their cost. Though it is a battle tactic, and the new balanced data slate changes would see a captain's Rites of Battle ability reduce it to 1 CP for his squad instead of 0. Though there are only a few units captains can lead which would want to hunt vehicles or monsters with shooting. It's really Hellblasters, Eradicators, and Last Fusel Eliminators. But Eradicators already reroll into monsters and vehicles, and Eliminators only have 3 shots. So even with Odes of Moment, you'll probably get 1 to 2 dice past your opponent's saving throw, and d6 damage is far from reliable, which doesn't leave a wide range of candidates for this stratagem, and as mentioned for units unable to leverage Rites of Battle, 2 CP is steep. So here's the alteration. No threat too great remains at 2 command points and still only applies when shooting at enemy vehicles and monsters, but in addition to rerolling wounds, it also increases the damage of attacks by 1 for weapons with a strength characteristic greater than 7. However, infantry and mounted units, excluding Gravis and Centurion units, must remain stationary in order to benefit from that bonus damage. This change has 3 takeaways. With regards to vehicles, it now gives that hefty 2 CP cost more value. For infantry, it allows the Imperial Fists Eradicators to benefit from their tank hunting stratagem, while a potent high-volume unit like Hellblasters will have to pay the high price of remaining stationary in order to claim the damage increases. And between No Threat Too Great and Battle Drill Recall, you have 2 useful options. One geared for quality, and one for quantity, which also happens to nicely divide between targets without and with invulnerable saves. All while calling back to the Imperial Fists Legacy of Dorn rule from last edition. Hail of Vengeance is a reactive return fire stratagem. Where most other chapters and legions' reactive strats are 1 command point, the Imperial Fists is 2. And you must have had a model be destroyed by that attack, so you can't use it on vehicles. It's awkward as hell, because you have to have an infantry unit be fired upon, and sustain damage so at least 1 model is destroyed, and have the enemy firing on your unit be a target you would want to shoot back at, because you probably don't want to shoot bolt rifles at, say, a Chaos Predator. And on top of all of that, you have to hope that you have enough remaining models in that unit to make spending 2 command points worthwhile. That is quite a few ifs. And this if, right here, can be controlled by the opposing player to a fairly large degree. That being said, should all of those ifs fall into place, even at 2 command points, a squad of intercessors dummying a group of fire warriors is big value when done out of phase. I do like the intended design of this strat and how it fits into the Imperial Fist themes as outlined earlier, but I think it needs to be massaged a little bit, so I'll suggest a single but impactful alteration. Allow the stratagem's target unit to fire at any target. And oh boy, I know this sounds like early 10th edition Wraithguards, but just hear me out. It's already a highly circumstantial set of criteria, and now the opposing player can't simply discourage you from using it through smart target priority on their part. And unlike early Wraithguard units, it's a strategic ploy stratagem, so only 1 unit would be able to leverage its potent utility. And 2 command points is expensive by 10th edition standards, so unless you've been hoarding your command points, using this unique exception in the enemy shooting phase means you won't have the command points for other clutch plays, whether they be stratagems from this Anvil Siege Force or the core rules. And personally, I think this kind of mechanic really opens up some interesting tactical choices. You know, the kind of tactical choices that make one's tabletop experience interesting. The kind of choices which are often lacking from detachment rule sets, or in some cases whole factions, which are less movement oriented and more static, like how the Anvil Siege Force is positioned. Which brings us to the end. What does this Imperial Fists Anvil Siege Force provide? Here are my proposed mods in pink. As you can see, these changes aren't vast, but I feel they will be impactful and improve the overall game experience for Imperial Fist players. Let's review. We now have a Detachment Rule, which provides a more accessible benefit for remaining stationary, no longer only applying to units which already had heavy weapons, and it can now be used defensively via Overwatch. Indomitable Fury no longer has the 1 in 6 chance to fail, but now restores fewer wounds on average, and so I've bumped it down 5 points. Fleet Commander now provides the bearer's unit with Ignores Cover, retaining some value after popping a rather swingy once per battle Mortal Wound Bomb ability, and so I've bumped it up by 5 points. Architect of War has been replaced with the Hand of Dorn, which allows the bearer to use Overwatch for 0 CP on a friendly unit within 6 inches once per turn, helping to carve out a unique mechanical identity for the Anvil Siege Force. No Threat Too Great now also increases the damage of ranged weapons by 1 if those weapons have a strength greater than 7, though infantry and mounted units must remain stationary for this bonus, excluding Gravis and Centurion units, which makes its cost more justifiable for vehicles, and regulates its use for infantry and mounted units so it favors thematic options. Battle Drill Recall is the same, but for the addition to increase the sustained hits amount by 1 for weapons which already have that ability. And Hail of Vengeance now allows the selected unit to shoot back at any visible enemy unit rather than the instigating enemy unit. A significant change, which better justifies its cost and numerous conditions. And that's it. For any Imperial Fist players who would like to give this a whirl, there's a link to this PDF in the video description. So if you do give it a shot, or even a look, I'm all ears for feedback, as I'd like to make things as tasteful as possible. Well, that's a wrap on this one. If you enjoyed this video, there are buttons for liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thanks for watching, and a special thanks to Julius Maximus, as well as my other generous patrons and channel members. Lately I've been doing hobby live streams, and currently I'm in the midst of a Wordbearer's arc. So if chill hobby jams are your thing, join in, and let's get those projects done. Anyways, thanks again for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.